Margaret Peterson was an 82-year-old woman who lived a quiet, peaceful life in her cozy suburban home. The house had been hers and her late husband's for over 40 years, filled with memories of laughter, love, and family gatherings. After her husband passed away 5 years ago, Margaret found herself alone but not entirely lonely. She had always been the kind of person who could find joy in small things, a blooming flower, a good book, or even the sound of birds chirping outside her window. But what truly kept her days bright was Max, her faithful companion. Max wasn't just any dog. He was special. Margaret had adopted him 2 years earlier from a local animal shelter. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary older dog, gray around the muzzle, with a slightly stiff gait that hinted at his age. But there was something about his calm eyes and gentle demeanor that drew Margaret to him instantly. When she brought him home, Max settled into their routine effortlessly. He would sit quietly by her side as she read, accompany her on short walks around the neighborhood, and curl up at her feet during chilly evenings. For Margaret, having Max felt like filling a void she hadn't realized existed after losing her husband. He gave her a sense of purpose and companionship she deeply cherished. The neighborhood where Margaret lived was picturesque, with neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and tidy driveways. It was the kind of place where people took pride in their homes, and the Homeowners Association, HOA, played a big role in maintaining that image. The HOA had strict rules about everything, from how tall grass could grow to what color mailboxes residents were allowed to have. Most people followed these guidelines without complaint, but lately tensions had started to rise. Some neighbors whispered about how the HOA seemed more concerned with appearances than practicality. Others grumbled about receiving fines for minor infractions like leaving a trash can out one extra day or planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. For Margaret, the tension came to a head when she received a formal letter in the mail. It was typed neatly on official HOA letterhead and delivered to her door along with the usual stack of bills and advertisements. As she sat down at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, she opened the envelope and began reading. The letter stated that she needed to remove the wooden ramp leading up to her front door because it was deemed unsightly and did not conform to the community's aesthetic standards. Margaret stared at the words, feeling a mix of disbelief and frustration bubbling inside her. That ramp meant so much more to her than just a piece of wood. A year ago, Margaret had fallen while trying to step off her porch. Her arthritis had worsened over time, making it difficult for her to navigate steps safely. Her doctor recommended installing a ramp to prevent future accidents, so she hired a handyman to build one. It wasn't fancy. It was simple, sturdy, and functional, but it made all the difference in her daily life. Without it, she wouldn't be able to leave her house independently. Removing it would mean relying on others for help constantly, which went against her desire to remain self-sufficient. Determined to resolve the issue peacefully, Margaret decided to attend the next HOA meeting. She figured if she explained her situation personally, maybe they'd understand why the ramp was so important. On the day of the meeting, she dressed carefully, choosing a comfortable yet presentable outfit. Max trotted happily beside her as she made her way to the community center where the meetings were held. Though he usually stayed home, Margaret thought bringing Max might soften the atmosphere. After all, who could resist a sweet old dog with soulful eyes? When they arrived, Margaret noticed several familiar faces milling about the lobby. Some offered polite smiles, while others barely acknowledged her presence. Inside the conference room, rows of chairs faced a long table where the HOA board members sat. Margaret chose a seat near the back, settling in with Max lying quietly at her feet. She clutched her cane nervously, rehearsing what she planned to say in her head. Despite her preparation, she couldn't shake the knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. As the meeting progressed, various topics were discussed: new landscaping proposals, parking restrictions, and upcoming social events. Finally, it was Margaret's turn to speak. Standing slowly with the help of her cane, she approached the podium. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but she steadied herself and explained how the ramp allowed her to maintain her independence despite her mobility challenges. She emphasized that it wasn't merely a convenience, but a necessity for her safety. Unfortunately, her heartfelt plea fell on deaf ears. Charles Whitmore, the HOA president, cut her off mid-sentence, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand. His tone was sharp and dismissive, accusing her of using her age as an excuse to ignore community rules. Margaret tried to stay composed, but the disrespect stung. As the meeting broke for a short recess, Charles approached her aggressively, towering over her frail frame. That's when everything escalated, and Max, sensing danger, sprang into action. Little did anyone know, this seemingly ordinary dog had a secret past that would change everything. Margaret stood nervously at the podium, her hands gripping its edges for support. Her heart pounded as she tried to explain why the wooden ramp at her front door was so important. She spoke slowly and clearly, hoping her words would resonate, with the HOA board members seated before her. "This isn't just a convenience," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "It's a necessity. Without it, I wouldn't be able to leave my house safely. My arthritis makes it nearly impossible to use stairs, and this ramp allows me to stay independent." But Charles Whitmore, the HOA president, didn't seem interested in listening. He sat at the center of the long table, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was stern, almost impatient, as if Margaret's explanation was wasting his time. When she finished speaking, instead of offering a thoughtful response, he leaned forward and interrupted her sharply. "Mrs. Peterson," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "we understand your situation, but you must realize that our community has standards. Everyone is expected to follow them regardless of personal circumstances." He paused briefly, then added, "Your ramp is unsightly. It detracts from the overall appearance of the neighborhood. We can't make exceptions for one homeowner when others are following the rules." The room fell silent. Margaret felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She had come prepared to reason with the board, to appeal to their sense of fairness. But Charles's dismissive attitude left her, feeling small and insignificant. Other attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding eye contact altogether. No one spoke up in her defense. Determined not to let his rudeness get the better of her, Margaret took a deep breath and tried again. "I understand the importance of keeping the neighborhood looking nice," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But surely there's a way to balance aesthetics with compassion. This ramp doesn't harm anyone. It helps me live my life with dignity. Isn't that worth considering?" Charles wasn't swayed. If anything, his irritation grew more apparent. "Compassion doesn't exempt you from compliance, Mrs. Peterson," he snapped. "You've had plenty of time to address this issue. If you don't remove the ramp within 48 hours, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." The finality in his tone struck Margaret like a blow. Legal action? Over a wooden ramp? The absurdity of the situation made her want to laugh or cry. Instead, she nodded silently and returned to her seat, Max rising to his feet beside her as if sensing her distress. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Margaret barely registered what was being discussed. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she could possibly fight back against such unfairness. When the meeting adjourned for a short break, Margaret stayed seated, clutching her cane tightly. She needed a moment to collect herself before heading home. Max lay quietly by her side, his warm presence offering a small measure of comfort. But peace didn't last long. Charles approached her during the recess, his strides purposeful and aggressive. Margaret looked up as he stopped directly in front of her chair, towering over her frail frame. His face was red with frustration, his jaw clenched. "Listen, Mrs. Peterson," he began, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of nearby conversations. "I don't know if you're deliberately ignoring our requests or if you simply think you're above the rules, but this ends now. Remove that eyesore by tomorrow or we'll have it removed for you, and trust me, you won't like the consequences." Margaret felt her stomach drop. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could utter a word, Charles reached out and grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her halfway to her feet. Whether he intended to intimidate her or physically force her to stand, it was unclear and unacceptable. Margaret winced at the sudden pain in her arm, her frail bones protesting under the pressure. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. What happened next stunned everyone in the room, including Charles himself. Max, who had been lying quietly beside Margaret, sprang into action with astonishing speed. One moment, he was a calm, unassuming dog resting on the floor. The next, he was on his feet, barking fiercely and positioning himself between Margaret and Charles. His posture changed completely, his ears flattened, his teeth bared slightly, and his body tensed as if ready to pounce. It was a transformation, so dramatic that even Margaret blinked in surprise. Charles froze mid-gesture, his grip on Margaret's arm loosening instantly. He stumbled backward, his face pale with shock. Max didn't lunge or bite. He didn't need to. With a series of low, menacing growls, he pinned Charles against the wall, using nothing but his imposing stance and unwavering gaze. Charles raised his hands defensively, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Call him off," he stammered, his voice trembling. "Make him stop." Margaret, still shaken but regaining her composure, placed a gentle hand on Max's back. "It's okay, Max," she said firmly, her voice surprisingly steady. "He's not going to hurt me. You can stand down now." To everyone's amazement, Max obeyed immediately. He stepped back, his growls subsiding, but remained alert, his eyes never leaving Charles. The tension in the room was palpable. Attendees, who had been chatting quietly moments earlier, were now staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before them. Some whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to capture the moment on camera. As the initial shock wore off, Margaret remembered something the shelter worker had mentioned casually when she adopted Max. He had once been part of a police K-9 unit. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, assuming his training days were far behind him. But now, watching Max display instincts honed by years of service, she realized just how special he truly was. Charles, visibly shaken, muttered an apology and retreated to his seat without another word. The break ended soon after, and the meeting resumed, though the atmosphere had shifted entirely. People glanced nervously at Max, who had resumed his position by Margaret's side, calm and collected once again. For the remainder of the session, no one dared challenge Margaret further. By the time the meeting concluded, Margaret felt drained but oddly empowered. As she gathered her things to leave, several neighbors approached her, offering words of support. One woman even hugged her, saying, "You handled that beautifully. That man had no right to treat you that way." Another neighbor knelt down to pet Max, marveling at his protective nature. "What a good boy," she cooed, scratching behind his ears. Max wagged his tail lazily, soaking up the attention. Walking home with Max by her side, Margaret couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of strength. She had gone into the meeting fearing confrontation, but thanks to Max, she walked away knowing she had stood her ground and won. Little did she know this incident was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would bring unexpected changes to her quiet life and turn both her and Max into local heroes. The whirlwind of attention surrounding Margaret and Max began to settle, but the ripple effects of their story continued to spread far beyond their quiet suburban neighborhood. People everywhere were captivated by the image of an elderly woman, standing up for herself, with her loyal dog stepping in as an unexpected hero. The viral video of Max defending Margaret against Charles Whitmore became a symbol of resilience and justice, sparking conversations about compassion, fairness, and the importance of protecting vulnerable members of society. In the weeks that followed, Margaret found herself at the center of a growing movement. Local news outlets weren't the only ones interested in her story. National media picked it up too. She received invitations to appear on talk shows, podcasts, and even morning television programs. At first, Margaret declined most of these offers. She didn't want to leave her routines or overwhelm herself with publicity. But when a well-known advocacy group reached out, asking her to speak at a conference focused on seniors' rights, she felt compelled to say yes. "I'm not used to being in the spotlight," Margaret admitted during her speech at the event. "But if sharing my story can help others feel less alone, then I'll do it." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had faced similar struggles with housing regulations or community associations. They applauded her courage and celebrated Max's role in bringing awareness to their cause. By the end of the conference, Margaret was approached by several organizations eager to collaborate with her. Some wanted to feature her in campaigns promoting senior independence, while others sought her advice on drafting policies that balanced aesthetics with accessibility. Back home, the HOA scrambled to repair its tarnished reputation. Following their public apology to Margaret, they announced sweeping changes to their enforcement practices. New guidelines were introduced, emphasizing flexibility and understanding when dealing with residents who had special needs. A dedicated committee was formed to review cases involving health-related modifications, like ramps or grab bars, ensuring that such requests wouldn't be dismissed outright. While some neighbors praised these efforts, others remained skeptical, wondering if the changes were genuine or merely an attempt to save face. Charles Whitmore, meanwhile, struggled to recover from the fallout. His aggressive behavior toward Margaret had made him a pariah in the community. Once respected, or at least tolerated, as the authoritative figurehead of the HOA, he now faced constant scrutiny and criticism. Neighbors whispered behind his back, and petitions calling for his resignation gained hundreds of signatures. Eventually, unable to withstand the pressure, Charles stepped down from his position. He moved out of the neighborhood shortly afterward, leaving behind a legacy of controversy that would linger for years. Margaret, however, chose to focus on the positives. With the HOA no longer breathing down her neck, she finally felt free to live without fear of retribution. Her ramp stayed firmly in place, painted a fresh coat of white thanks to the kind handyman who insisted it deserved a makeover. Flowers bloomed along the edges of her yard, adding color and charm to her property. Though she hadn't intended to make any grand statements, her home became a testament to the idea that functionality and beauty could coexist. Max, of course, basked in the adoration showered upon him. Strangers stopped Margaret daily to compliment her hero dog, often asking permission to take photos or give him treats. Children begged their parents to let them visit, hoping to meet the legendary canine who had stood up to a bully. Margaret obliged graciously, finding joy in watching Max interact with his newfound fans. Despite his fame, he remained as gentle and loving as ever, embodying the spirit of loyalty and protection that had endeared him to so many. One day, a local artist approached Margaret with an unusual request. Inspired by Max's story, she wanted to create a mural honoring him and Margaret in the heart of the neighborhood. The design featured Max mid-leap, his ears perked and eyes alert, while Margaret stood tall beside him, clutching her cane with quiet determination. When the mural was unveiled weeks later, it drew crowds of curious onlookers. Families posed for pictures in front of it, and children traced their fingers over the vibrant colors. For Margaret, seeing her and Max immortalized in such a way was both humbling and heartwarming. It reminded her that their story wasn't just about one incident, it was about the power of standing together, human and animal alike, to fight for what's right. As time went on, Margaret embraced her role as an advocate for seniors' rights. She partnered with local nonprofits to host workshops aimed at educating older adults about navigating disputes with HOAs or landlords. She also worked closely with animal shelters, encouraging people to adopt older dogs like Max. They might look calm and unassuming, she told audiences during one adoption event, but don't underestimate them. Sometimes they have hidden strengths you'll never see until you need them most. Her partnership with shelters led to another unexpected opportunity: writing a book. Encouraged by friends and supporters, Margaret decided to document her journey, from losing her husband and adopting Max to confronting the HOA and becoming an advocate. Titled Hero on Four Legs, the memoir combined humor, wisdom, and heartfelt reflections on life, loss, and second chances. To her surprise, the book became a bestseller, resonating with readers of all ages. Letters poured in from across the HOA country, thanking Margaret for inspiring them to stand up for themselves or consider adopting a rescue dog. Through it all, Margaret never lost sight of what truly mattered: her connection with Max. Their bond deepened with each passing day, strengthened by shared experiences and mutual trust. On sunny afternoons, they strolled through the park, where Max greeted familiar faces with wagging enthusiasm. On rainy days, they curled up indoors, Margaret reading aloud while Max dozed contentedly at her feet. Life hadn't turned out exactly how she'd imagined after her husband's passing, but she had found new purpose and new love in the form of a four-legged companion. Margaret often thought about how different things might have been if she hadn't adopted Max. Would she have stood her ground against Charles without his presence? Probably not, she admitted to herself. Max had given her more than companionship. He had shown her that strength comes in many forms, whether it's the courage to speak up or the instinct to protect those you care about. Together, they proved that even the most ordinary-seeming lives could harbor extraordinary moments, and that heroes, both human and canine, are often closer than we realize. Though the chaos of the past few months had subsided, Margaret knew their story would continue to inspire others long after the headlines faded. And as she watched Max chase leaves in the backyard one crisp autumn afternoon, she smiled, knowing they had done something remarkable, not just for themselves but for countless others who needed to believe in the possibility of change. Margaret's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined, but as the months passed, a sense of calm settled over her once again. The whirlwind of attention, interviews, speeches, book signings, began to fade, leaving behind a quieter rhythm that felt more familiar and comforting. She returned to her routines, tending to her garden, reading books by the window, and taking leisurely walks with Max. Yet, there was an undeniable richness to her days now, a deeper connection not only with her dog but also with the world around. The neighborhood too seemed different. What had once been a place where Margaret often felt invisible now buzzed with warmth and camaraderie. Neighbors who had previously walked past her house without a second glance now waved enthusiastically or stopped to chat. Some even brought homemade treats for Max, knowing how much he loved them. Children would run up to him during evening strolls, giggling as they scratched behind his ears or offered him tennis balls to chase. Max soaked it all in, wagging his tail with boundless enthusiasm despite his advancing age. One of the most profound changes came from within Margaret herself. Before the incident with the HOA, she had sometimes felt weighed down by loneliness and self-doubt. Losing her husband had left a void she struggled to fill, and while Max provided companionship, she still carried a quiet sadness inside her. But standing up to Charles and seeing Max leap into action had awakened something in her. It reminded her that she wasn't powerless, even at 82 years old. That realization gave her a renewed sense of purpose, one that extended far beyond her own backyard. Her advocacy work blossomed into something meaningful and impactful. Margaret became a regular speaker at community events, sharing her story, and urging others to speak out when faced with unfair treatment. She partnered with local organizations to create programs aimed at helping seniors navigate disputes with housing associations or landlords. Her message was simple, yet powerful. You deserve to live your life with dignity, no matter your age or circumstances. Audiences listened intently, nodding along as she spoke about the importance of compassion and understanding, not just for seniors but for everyone. Max remained her constant companion during these endeavors, always by her side whether she was addressing a crowd or meeting new people. Though he rarely barked or growled anymore, his presence alone commanded respect. People admired his loyalty and bravery, qualities that shone through every time he accompanied Margaret. Together they formed an unstoppable team, inspiring others to believe in their own strength and resilience. The mural in the neighborhood park continued to draw visitors, becoming a beloved landmark. Families posed for photos in front of it, pointing out details like Max's alert posture or Margaret's determined expression. Schoolchildren wrote essays about the story behind the artwork, learning valuable lessons about kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right. For Margaret, seeing how deeply her and Max's story resonated with younger generations filled her with pride. She hoped it would inspire them to treat others with empathy and stand up against injustice whenever they encountered it. As autumn turned to winter, Margaret embraced the slower pace of life. Snow blanketed the ground, transforming her garden into a sparkling wonderland. Max, now fully settled into his role as a neighborhood icon, enjoyed lounging by the fireplace, his snout resting on his paws as Margaret read aloud from one of her favorite novels. On clear mornings they ventured outside together, their breath visible in the frosty air. Margaret marveled at how peaceful everything felt, even as memories of the tumultuous past lingered in the back of her mind. Despite the challenges she'd faced, Margaret refused to dwell on bitterness or resentment. Instead, she chose gratitude for Max, for her supportive neighbors, and for the unexpected opportunities that had come her way. Writing. Hero on Four Legs had allowed her to reflect on her journey, capturing moments both joyful and painful. The letters she received from readers warmed her heart, reminding her that her story had touched lives in ways she couldn't have predicted. One woman wrote to say that after losing her husband, she had considered giving up, but reading Margaret's memoir gave her hope. Another shared that adopting an older dog, inspired by Max, had brought unexpected happiness to her family. Even as Margaret celebrated her achievements, she knew that life was unpredictable. Max was getting older, and though he remained healthy and active, she couldn't ignore the signs of aging. His steps were slower now, and he spent more time napping than chasing balls in the yard. Still, his spirit remained undiminished. Every morning, he greeted her with the same wagging tail and soulful eyes that had won her heart the day she adopted him. Margaret cherished every moment they shared, knowing that their bond was precious and irreplaceable. One chilly December evening, as Margaret sat knitting by the fire, she reflected on how much her life had changed since adopting Max. He had given her so much more than companionship. He had taught her about courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. In return, she had given him a loving home where he could live out his golden years in comfort and joy. They had saved each other in their own ways, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as ordinary moments. The holidays brought a flurry of visitors to Margaret's door. Neighbors dropped off plates of cookies and festive decorations, insisting she hang them up to brighten her home. Friends invited her to join holiday parties, ensuring she wouldn't spend the season alone. And then, there were the children, who arrived one snowy afternoon armed with handmade ornaments and garlands for Max's custom vest. "We wanted to make him feel extra special," one little girl explained shyly, handing Margaret a glittery star-shaped badge that read, "Best Dog Ever." Margaret laughed, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. She fastened the ornament onto Max's vest, watching as he strutted proudly around the room, clearly aware of the admiration surrounding him. As the kids played with him, tossing toys and laughing at his antics, Margaret realized how full her life had become. Loneliness no longer haunted her. It had been replaced by love, laughter, and a deep sense of belonging. On New Year's Eve, Margaret stood on her porch with Max by her side, watching fireworks light up the night sky. The neighborhood glowed with celebration, and for the first time in years she felt truly part of it all. She leaned down to scratch Max's head, whispering, "Here's to a new chapter, my dear friend. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And as the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a fresh year, Margaret knew she was ready. With Max at her side, she had faced bullies, inspired strangers, and discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. Life might throw challenges her way, but she had learned that resilience wasn't about being fearless. It was about finding the courage to keep going, no matter what. Together, Margaret and Max proved that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Whether protecting a loved one, standing up for justice, or simply bringing joy to those around them, their story reminded everyone who heard it that even the smallest acts of bravery could spark extraordinary change. And as they stepped into the new year hand in paw, they did so with hearts full of hope, gratitude, and endless possibilities. The HOA meeting ended in a haze of murmurs and awkward glances. Margaret, still processing what had just happened, slowly made her way out of the community center with Max trotting faithfully beside her. Though she felt drained, there was an undeniable sense of relief and even a flicker of pride. For the first time in years, she had stood up for herself, and Max had been her unexpected champion. As they walked home together under the soft glow of streetlights, Margaret couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. Her sweet, unassuming dog had revealed a hidden side that left everyone speechless. But little did Margaret know, the story wasn't over yet. News of the incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. By morning, whispers filled the air as neighbors exchanged details about what had transpired at the meeting. Some recounted how Charles Whitmore had aggressively confronted Margaret, only to be thwarted by her loyal dog. Others marveled at Max's transformation from a quiet companion into a fierce protector. Before long, someone posted a video online. It showed Max stepping between Margaret and Charles, his posture commanding respect, while Charles backed away nervously. The clip went viral almost instantly. Within hours, comments poured in from people across the country who were moved by the story. "What a brave dog," one person wrote. "This is why we need stricter rules against bullying seniors," another chimed in. Local news outlets picked up on the buzz, sending reporters to interview Margaret and learn more about the heroic canine. At first, Margaret hesitated when journalists knocked on her door. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight and worried about drawing too much attention. But Max seemed unfazed, wagging his tail cheerfully whenever cameras appeared. Eventually, Margaret agreed to share their story, not for fame, but to shed light on the importance of compassion and understanding within communities. During one interview, a reporter asked Margaret if she'd known about Max's background before adopting him. "Not really," Margaret admitted with a chuckle. "When I got him from the shelter, they mentioned he'd been trained as a police dog, but I didn't think much of it. He's always been so calm and gentle around me. I guess I forgot he still has those instincts deep down." She paused, looking affectionately at Max, who sat attentively by her side. "I'm grateful he remembered them when I needed him most." As the days passed, public outrage grew. Not toward Margaret or Max, but toward the HOA and its handling of the situation. People criticized Charles's behavior, calling it abusive and unnecessary. Petitions circulated online demanding accountability from the HOA board. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance began reaching out to Margaret, offering support and apologizing for not speaking up sooner. Some even volunteered to help maintain her yard or run errands for her, ensuring she wouldn't face any further hardships. Meanwhile, Charles found himself at the center of a storm. Once confident and authoritative, he now avoided public appearances altogether. Rumors swirled about his impending resignation, though no official statement came immediately. Behind closed doors, tensions simmered among the HOA board members. They knew they couldn't ignore the backlash brewing both locally and nationally. After an emergency meeting held late one evening, the board issued a formal apology to Margaret. In a written statement, they acknowledged their failure to consider her needs and pledged to review their policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. They also announced that Margaret could keep her ramp without penalty. For Margaret, the apology was bittersweet. While she appreciated the gesture, she couldn't help but feel frustrated that it took such a dramatic turn of events for them to listen. Still, she accepted it graciously, choosing to focus on the positive changes that might come from this experience. "If my story helps other seniors feel empowered to speak up," she told a reporter during another interview, "then maybe something good can come out of all this." Max, of course, became an overnight celebrity. Strangers stopped Margaret during her walks to compliment him or ask if they could take a photo with him. Children giggled as they tossed tennis balls in the park, delighted when Max bounded after them with surprising agility for a dog his age. Someone even gifted Margaret a custom-made vest embroidered with bold letters spelling out "Hero Dog." Max wore it proudly, strutting through the neighborhood like the star he had become. Despite the newfound attention, Margaret remained humble. She continued living her quiet life, tending to her garden and enjoying her books. But now, there was a noticeable shift in the way people treated her. Neighbors who had once ignored her waved hello or stopped to chat. A group of women from the community invited her to join their weekly coffee club, eager to hear more about her adventures with Max. Even the handyman who had built her ramp returned unexpectedly one afternoon, offering to repaint it free of charge. It deserves a fresh coat of paint, he said with a wink. After all, it's famous now. Margaret's advocacy work began almost accidentally. Inspired by the outpouring of support she received, she started attending town hall meetings and sharing her perspective on senior citizens' rights in housing communities. Her speeches were heartfelt and relatable, often punctuated by anecdotes about Max. Pets aren't just animals, she told a crowd at one event. They're family. And sometimes they remind us of our own strength when we forget it ourselves. Her words resonated deeply, earning her applause and admiration from audiences of all ages. Back at home, Margaret cherished every moment with Max. Though he had always been special to her, their bond felt stronger than ever. On quiet evenings, she would sit in her favorite armchair, scratching behind his ears as he rested his head on her lap. "You saved me, you know," she whispered to him one night. Max looked up at her with those soulful eyes, his tail thumping gently against the floor. It was as if he understood exactly what she meant. Life hadn't turned out the way Margaret expected after her husband's passing, but she had learned to embrace its twists and turns. With Max by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they proved that even the smallest acts of courage could spark meaningful change, and that heroes, whether human or canine, often emerge when we least expect them.